Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Gaelic Lives. It's a preview show. Saturday is Ulster final day, Scotstown and Kilcoo. And thankfully, I'm joined to talk about it today by somebody who knows about winning Ulster titles and All-Ireland titles and knows about playing against Scotstown and Kilcoo. Glen's Michael Warnock. So, Spike, thank you very much for jumping on. So, how are things?
What? Aye, things are 100%. I'd much rather be taking the field this Saturday than giving a preview against it. But look, it's the nature of football, the nature of sport, and you just sort of have to get on with it. But we've a bit of thinking to do over the next few months in terms of seeing if we can get back there. But look, in general, everything's going well.
I suppose you had a real whirlwind of a couple of years of achieving highly, obviously, on the back of a lot of underage success, but have you had time to reflect on what you have actually achieved? And I know I'm not saying you have not, you have more to come, but I just mean looking back.
I suppose hindsight, maybe at times we've had a couple of long winters now, the last two seasons, in fairness, so we've maybe reflected a wee bit in that regards, Mal. But in terms of allowing yourself to really sit back and take a look at what it was, we'll probably not get to do that realistically until we stop playing. Whenever you're in that sort of cycle of playing, if you're not winning, you're looking at what you can do to get back to winning. And in fairness to the two teams coming on Saturday that are competing, it's probably the two teams that have been the most consistent in Ulster within the last 10 years, and the best at getting over the line. And look, for us, we've a wee bit of work to do in regards to that to get back into Ulster. But like in terms of looking back at the success, I don't think we'll be able to do that really until we retire, because you're always looking at what's next.
And after winning the Derry title, what was different about Ulster for you in the campaigns?
I would say the big thing, which it actually took me by surprise, was you felt the shackles was off when you got out of your own county. The nerves maybe that you were feeling before games wasn't there. Probably because it's so difficult to win your own county championship. Now, people might say, well, surely it's harder to win in Ulster. And look, obviously it is. The opposition's got more quality and you're coming up against county champions. But sometimes when you get through your own county, you're competing against teams that if they win in Ulster could do just as well as you, if not better, depending on how they perform in the day. And probably that was the big thing that surprised me most, was that whenever you get into Ulster, you just felt like, geez, we can give this a rattle here. That pressure wasn't on. And that was brilliant, because it was the first time as a player I experienced it, because there was always that pressure with us of, will we ever win a county championship, considering the underage success. So that was a nice experience to get.
And what's it like running out of that tunnel on Ulster final day, whether it's under floodlights or during the day or whatever? It's and I suppose that's where all the eyes are this weekend. But for somebody who's walked it, is it just amazing?
It is. The Ulster Club competitions, a competition that once you get into it, you nearly become addicted to it, and until you get an appreciation of playing in it, and probably success helps with that as well. The fact we've won it twice really helps with that. But it's just such an unbelievable competition to be a part of, in terms of people give off in terms of the time of year you're playing it at and that. But to me, that would mix the Ulster Club, the cold, dark, wet evenings, and playing at a time of year when very few teams and clubs are getting to play. I'd give them a right arm to get back to playing in the Ulster Club again, to be honest. And to the teams that are involved in it, unless you maybe get the opportunity to reflect on it, you don't appreciate how lucky you are playing in it, to be honest. But just the calibre of the games that we've even experienced from playing on it, and the atmosphere you get in some of the venues, in particular the athletic grounds, it's probably one of the best venues that the GA has to offer in terms of the atmosphere and everything that it gets.
Yeah, funny, speaking to a few of the players over this past few weeks, football and hurling, and they were just saying can't wait to get back there. So it's that attraction. But looking into this weekend, obviously the weather has had an impact with Kilcoo, have been sort of waiting around for that extra bit of time, and Newbridge went through that roller coaster with Scotstown, and Scotstown come out the other side. So is there an advantage one way or the other, or does it depend basically how you're playing in terms of form?
I think it's, you could look at it from both sides. Ultimately, Saturday will tell the tale in that. But if you're in Kilcoo's camp, people will say, "God, maybe waiting an extra week isn't great." But then, if they have a few niggles and injuries, they're probably rubbing their hands. Which I think, Aaron Brannigan has been struggling sort of the majority of the year for them, and is a massive player for them. So just thinking of him, and look, like any team at this time of year, there's players that'll be playing that have niggles and injuries that most people won't know about. So it gives them an opportunity to clear that up. The Scotstown, they're sort of saying 2 weeks on, 2 weeks on, and that gives them that maybe advantage a wee bit in terms of that they're just stuck in that routine. They're they're just being given that opportunity to stick at it in terms of knowing their preparation and things like that. Well, and like people will look at it from different ways, saying, "God, is 3 weeks good? Is it not?" The reality is, I think people overthink these things at times, and if it was me, I would much rather be in Kilcoo's position because they've had that run of fixtures in terms of, the consistent level of 2 weeks up until recently there.
Like after a game like that, like the next few days, I know you always talk about recovery, but there must be just so much planning involved when the final whistle goes until you're playing in the next round. As a player, you don't fully appreciate, but when you're inside it, there's a lot in it.
I think as a player, you're just on to the next thing, especially the Scotstown players the majority of them have a lot more experience than me, but I know from even just my own experiences there that as a player, you move to the next game. You analyse the game you're playing, you're analysing the opposition, and you're worrying about your recovery and everything else that happens around that in terms of the management team. They take care of everything else. And as a player, you're just focusing on playing and trying to get ready for the next game and bring the best performance you can. And I suppose that's the joys of playing. You don't have anything outside of that really to partake in.
And the new look rules, have they changed the game much from your point of view? Not even in terms of the two teams this weekend, but generally just how maybe winter football is played as such? Or does it depend on the team, obviously, I suppose?
I suppose people will look at it in many different ways. If you look at Kilcoo have won down again, Scotstown have won Monaghan again, Glenty's won Donegal again, Newbridge won Derry again. So there's 4 teams just off the top of my head straight away that, a number of the Glenty's and Scotstown, and considering the age profile, maybe as some of their more experienced players are teams that people would have been saying the new rules wouldn't have suited. Scotstown can't avail of begging coming up the pitch now or having that extra man. And look, the rules obviously have played an impact. It helps the attacking players, which is brilliant. There's a wee bit more kicking in the game. But the reality is, it comes down to individual players and which team plays better as a unit. And no surprise, those teams that have come through have been the best teams in their respective counties. And look, I suppose this time of year, naturally you don't get as much kicking because of the conditions. So I'm unsure to what factor they'll play in terms of the game. If anything, I think it'll probably favour Kilcoo a wee bit just because of the runners they have and the legs they have and the pace. But Scotstown have an advantage in terms of their height and around the middle and stuff like that, and that can be a big advantage in terms of kickouts now that you have the kickout arc there and you have to go beyond that 40 metres.
What do you feel the big battles are this weekend? Obviously, we don't know the status of Conor McCarthy. David McCaig did say that they were just waiting to see is he back, and then you touched on Aaron Brannigan. Martin Corey did say that again it's a waiting game, so we're unaware of things like that. But park that. What do you see as the big battles?
Look, I think probably kickouts is massive, and for Scotstown, I think any time you sort of come up against Kilcoo, any team that sort of sits off them or maybe has that fear element of them, they just seem to be able to split right through teams. The running power they have is unreal in terms of Sheelan Johnson, Ryan Johnson, Eugene Brannigan, a player that probably most people have a very good understanding of, but he probably doesn't get the respect he deserves in terms of the damage that he does in oppositions.
Is this Eugene?
Definitely Eugene. He's in terms of people think if you can get in tight and close him, but it's being able to do that to him. He's such an elusive player, and he just once he sees space, he just goes for it. And causes the opposition such problems. I think if Scotstown are to impose themselves in the game, they need to do it from the kickouts. and especially with the height advantage they have around the middle, probably that middle six that they have over Kilcoo, they would have a strong height advantage there. And I think if they're to try and impose themselves in the game and do that early, they need to go after Kilcoo's kickouts. But that's easier said than done with Niall Keane there. He's a brilliant kicker of the ball. And then you've Ryan McAvoy and Darrell Brannigan, who's brilliant outlets for him in terms of the short to medium kickouts.
And even the fact he's kicking from both feet is, spoke to a few goalkeepers, and a lot of them are bringing that into their locker. So, just from the fact if you find a pocket, if the goalie can't use that side of his body, then that's closed. So that's a big thing.
Oh, it's such an advantage, like if you're sort of coming from a press perspective of the opposition, and you're thinking, right, he's a right-sided kicker, we squeeze him to the side that is sort of his strongest and expose him to the weaker side, so he has to go there. But then he uses his left foot and maximizes that space that he has. Then it's it means players are maybe standing off an extra 2 to 3 yards, and that extra 2 to 3 yards means that opens up for the keeper to get the ball away. Now, ultimately, you have to go and deliver in those kicks, and if you're not as comfortable kicking to that side, you would maybe try and entice them into that as such. That might be something Scotstown are looking at, but it's a serious asset to have. You'd much rather your keeper have it than not.
And then the other side of it is Rory Beggan, just the distance, Michael, that he can. Even the kick out to Kieran Hughes that led to Michael McCarville's goal, that it's fighting the balance from sitting off and dropping back, and a wee bit like Sean Patton when Kerry were going down that avenue. It's a weapon.
Oh, it is. Having a keeper that is consistently hitting the long kick out and getting that distance consistently is massive. In particular, if teams are trying to press you, and if they're trying to press you, it opens up over the top. And I suppose that's one of the good things in terms of the kickouts, that if the ball does get over the top, there's serious advantages for teams to get in behind. In particular, if you've that pace and the kickout. Like a lot of teams now have set plays in terms of kickouts, and every team will have a long kickout that they're trying to work on, and who's going beyond and who's coming in for breaks and stuff. And with Beggan, like, he's consistently putting the ball nearly in the far 45 and between it and the 65, and like there's very few teams have that, and very few players can do that, and that's such an advantage. With Scotstown and their height around the middle, I've mentioned that if they can get maybe a flick on there, or boys coming in around the break and breaking out at pace, it's serious, because it means Kilcoo have a much bigger sort of area to try and press and close down than the likes of, say, Scotstown would.
The rest of the players in the pitch are going to wonder, we're going to analyse goalkeepers, but it is such a big factor. But apart from that, there, like Scotstown, since probably you came up against them, they've got the Tommy Mallons, the Max Maguires. They have a lot of new players, and funny, David did say that. He says that he expected them to sort of deliver the way, he knew they were coming. So that's a lot to do with the freshness. And then I suppose, like, they were in the wrong end of a big defeat last year, and then to come with fresh players is a biggie as well for Scotstown.
I wouldn't read massively into the defeat they got last year from Kilcoo, because some days the game just doesn't go for you, and like the 2 goals that Kilcoo got for half time, and in fairness, you probably have to give them credit, in particular Jerome Johnson. For a lot of teams would have, and for the first goal, would have just flicked the ball over the bar and took the point, but typical Kilcoo fashion and the killer instinct, they went for the goal and hit off a man's head and into the net for Scotstown, and then the second goal just before half-time hit the upright and bounced it to a Kilcoo man in the back of the net. And like in the 27th minute of that game, I'm near sure Conor McCarthy beat it 5-5. Everybody thought we were in for
a big second half.
Similar type game of the year, and Kilcoo were in the driving seat, and then they get a goal straight after half-time, just killed the game. So it's probably one of those games, I would say, that, from a Scotstown perspective, they'll be analysing massively to make sure it doesn't happen again. But from a neutral perspective, you're thinking, it's one of those games just didn't go right for them, kind of. In particular, when the game the year before was so tight. So, look, they'll obviously be looking at it from the perspective of not giving Kilcoo the opportunity to run through the middle like they did the last time. and that's easier said than done. In particular now that you can only get 11 back instead of 15. But here it's setting up for a phenomenal game, because I think both teams have different strengths and bring different things to the game. So hopefully it becomes the game that people are hoping for.
And just a couple more points on this game. Like against Loch McCrory, I was watching it back there during the week. Like Sheelan Johnson, Ryan Johnson, I think it was Anthony Morgan, point off their so-called weaker foot. So it leaves it that wee bit more unpredictable. And as a defender, I know you're very attack-minded, but at the same time, a lot of your brief is to defend. Is it like the goalkeeping scenario where it just leaves you that wee bit more unpredictable, where you can't commit? And is that a big advantage for Kilcoo?
In terms of what way, sort of like defensively, that they're having to keep so many men back, Mal, or that they're getting a spread of scores as such?
Not even just kicking off both feet, just about the angles of where you can close people off.
I think the new rules probably lend themselves to better footballers, whereas the game probably become, understandably so, whatever county players seem to be doing, county teams, naturally it filters down at the club level. And, there's very few club players that are out of shape now, in particular playing at this level. And getting away with it as such, the majority of them are all in great shape. But I think that the game always comes back, in particular these games always comes back to the best footballers making the best decisions at the most critical times in the game. And obviously being able to kick off both sides is massive. Like, people wouldn't know Aaron Brannigan for kicking off his left foot, but he kicked 2 off his left and carried off in the down final. Even the commentators in the down TV were making comment on it as such, and he kicked 3 points from corner back. But again, maybe something that he didn't have in his locker a number of years ago, he has brought to his locker now. And without that, they mightn't have got those scores, or if he's looking for somebody else, maybe they get open to do that. So, he's added that on, so it gives him the opportunity to take those scores rather than maybe just trying to find someone else. And it's those scenarios that change games and win games for you, such that if you're having the ability to be able to execute in those positions, that it's massive for teams, because one score in these games is so critical. We've seen it at the weekend, in the Bars and Dingle game, that that one decision at the end of the game ultimately decided the game, and that's what sits in people's mind. And these games here are no different. These provincial club championships, they're decided in moments.
Is it a difficult one to call?
I think it is. I think it is because of the different strengths that each team has. If I was to give a prediction, I'd probably go with Kilcoo, just because they've had an extra week in terms of freshening boys up, getting men back from injury, and in the fact they've done it on a couple of occasions before. And I just think they've got pace all sort of over the pitch. They're a well-balanced team as well. They're not reliant heavily on 1 or 2 people for scores. They just seem to get a real spread of scores. Look, obviously, as a neutral in it as such, everybody, because of the heartbreak Scotstown's had, everybody would love to see them do it, and if you're one of their players, you're probably thinking that's quite patronising, which is understandable. But I just think it's hard to look past Kilcoo. But at the same time, there hasn't been much outside of the game last year between these teams any time they've met. And I wouldn't want to be putting money on it, put it like that.
No, as we found out in this game, the prediction is purely a mugs game, as we found out year on year and week on week. Before I let you go, obviously the Glen scenario with the letter that was sent out, and it's based around the stretch of the county season by 2 weeks, and it's had different opinions. Some people think that it's not a big deal, others think it is, and I suppose from somebody who's played in a high-achieving club team that goes deep into the season, and you're obviously playing along with players who have played long county seasons, what is it in the letter, or what are the key points that you feel are being dealt with here or talked about here?
I think the big thing people are missing from it is they see the 2 weeks and just think, God, it's 2 weeks. It's not just that it's 2 weeks. Actually, when any county player comes back, and I'm just speaking in the experience we've had as a club from the last sort of 5-6 years anyway, they need a rest. The county season is just so mentally taxing on players because of the levels of training the demands of training, and even the demands outside of the game now in terms of the social media scrutiny that they get, that they need a break away from it. And that 2 weeks turns into 4 or 5, depending on what your championship structure is. 6 weeks as such. We've had players that when they've arrived back have took 1 week. We've had players, depending on how well they went with the county too, and others that have taken a month. I know the club structure in Derry's changed, and that probably makes that a wee bit more difficult for the club player coming back in, and probably shortens that window of a time frame that they can take a break. But I think that's the big thing from it. I think club players are getting extremely frustrated time and time again, because the GAA calendar is changing nearly every couple of years in terms of what they're introducing, whether it's the Super 8s or the format they're going to now. And it's really difficult for county boards in terms of fixtures to secure and sort of look ahead and plan in terms of how that's going to be and give a structure for club players. Maybe everybody thinks it should happen a year in advance, but why can't club players have a schedule that maybe they know is going to be the case for the next 2, 3, 4 years as such? And I know for myself, from our county players' perspective, I want to be playing with my county players. Ultimately, everybody's county players are the best players they have in your club, and you want to play with your best players. And sort of the longer, and each year everything moves forward and everything becomes that wonderful word in the GA at the moment, professional. The more that begins to happen, the less club teams are getting with their county men. And the reality is club teams don't see their county men until the county season's over.
And then you might spend 10 years developing a county player, and then you're not seeing them. And what some people are saying against this letter is that perhaps a county can plan for an All-Ireland final, and if they get knocked out early, so they can just change the calendar. But the club player has family, has holidays, has weddings, has work commitments. It's not as easy as that, and that's the point you're making about the schedule, about needing a structure.
It is, and look, as times move as well, you have a lot more people that go travelling now. I can't really fault the Derry County Board in that regard. But, look, there is other counties there that, for example, they just bring fixtures forward or they move fixtures out because of how well the county performs. And that's really difficult for club players to manoeuvre with, and in particular, I've been through booking my own wedding, booking my own honeymoon and fixing it all around football to the dislike of my wife, Leanne. But I'm certainly not the only club player to do that based on the fixtures and maybe basing it on last year's fixtures and how they're working. And in fairness, as I've said, Derry County Board's been generally fairly good at that. Now, obviously, there's structural issues and things like that, but not every county gets that right. But I just think the gist of what the club is trying to get out there is that, at what stage does the chopping and changing move, and at what stage do clubs get their county men? Because you develop yourself with your club for years and years, and then ultimately the guys that have real ambition and want to achieve success at the top level go to the county. And if you're not getting them back to August time of this year, which could be the reality for some clubs across different counties, and your championship's fixed for August, what level of training are you getting done, and what opportunity are you giving your clubs to really achieve success?
Michael, thank you very much for your time and your insight into what an Ulster club final day looks like, and hopefully you have a good Christmas, and I'm sure you'll be doing some sort of training to keep yourself taken over and see you in the new year. So thank you very much for your time, and chat soon.
No bother at all. Thank you. 100%, Matt. Thanks.
In the second part of the podcast, we heard from the Scotstown and Kilcoo camps ahead of Saturday's big game in Armagh. First of all, we hear from Scotstown manager David McCaig and the availability of Conor McCarthy and the new players coming into the Scotstown team.
You know from talking to the players over the last 24 hours that the game took a huge toll physically on a lot of fellas, obviously with the extra time, but the nature of the game as well. It just was an awful lot of accelerations, decelerations. So it was a really different physical challenge than maybe what we'd experienced before. So that's tough in one sense, but in another sense it builds a bit of physical capacity and resilience. So there's positives taken from that as well.
In terms of Conor, with him just coming back into the thing, he's obviously hadn't factored for extra time, but is that a plus point for him that he's got a wee bit of extra time that maybe you might need going to Kilcoo, or what way is he?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's definitely sort of one of the positive unintended consequences of Sunday's game. So we're hoping that again just deepens his physical capacity at this stage of the season, given the nature of the layoff that he had, and his just return to play is enhanced, I think, by his experience on Sunday.
I didn't fully appreciate how many young fellas you had coming in this year. I thought there was only 2 or 3, but you've 5 or 6 across your squad. I suppose, is this the first year they've all been in? And I suppose, what has it brought?
It is the first year they've all been in. I suppose the temptation was there to introduce them last year, but again we wanted to respect their minor campaign, the one that won on minor championship last year, and they qualified for the St Paul's tournament. And I suppose we respect that tournament, and we didn't use them last year. Look, they brought a great energy and great freshness. They brought good quality. We're actually missing Sean O'Mcilwain, who suffered a very bad injury during the championship. There's no doubt
he was brilliant for them in the minor campaign that time.
Yeah, there's a young fellow there, Mark McCaffrey, a minor player who we're really excited about. I have no doubt Mark McCaffrey would have featured in this championship as well, if he'd have been available as well. And there's just 1 or 2 others, who have been drafted into the on 20 squad recently as well in the club. So, there's a lot of great work happening in the club, and our young players are ambitious and they want to play for Scotstown and want to play at a high level. So, it's really energised everybody, and say that every year there's an odd fresh face or 2 knocking about, and this year's group have just added a lot of quality to the squad.
Are you surprised with how they've got on, or have they exceeded your expectations or whatever?
No, they've met my expectations in terms of, I suppose, watching them grow from their 8 years of age into the young men that they are. And I suppose that's the other thing I'd like to say. They're great young fellas, they've good character, good values. And I say that the club and representing the club comes very high up on their value set themselves. So no, they haven't exceeded my expectations at all. They've given exactly what we expected. And
that's the thoughts from the Scotstown camp. Micheál Rooney, Kilcoo's wing back. I asked him about bouncing back from last year's Ulster final. Peter McCartan's last minute score was the one in the game for Errigal.
We were in the dressing room area last year after the final, and Errigal's bin box was going into the dressing room. They had won, and I remember Eugene Brannigan's face just walking, just sheer disappointment. The 2 emotions that had been so late in the game. But how quickly do you get over that, or not? Like, do you carry it all winter, or because it was such a fine margin?
I don't think you really ever get over defeat. I think you need that wee bit of that setback. Sometimes you have to lose one to win one, sort of thing, and I don't think you ever get over it. I think you always do hold on to it slightly because of the pain it causes you, especially when you give your whole life to football. Like everything you do revolves around football, your work, your job, your relationship, everything you do, like it's all to do with football and how you can get better and all that sort of stuff. And I think like you do hold on to it, and like for me personally, like things in that match that if I watch back and I see things that I do, that's the things that I go, right, I need to work on that now and try and get better to make sure that if you ever do get back in that position, you have a chance to rectify it. And look, if you were to say to me walking out of the athletic grounds a year ago that we would get the opportunity to play in another Ulster club final, to try and right wrongs or to try and even just have another day out, it's one of the best days in the club calendar, I would have took your hand off for it.
How much value is there in those tight games? Because you have obviously built up that bank.
Yeah.
Scotstown have them as well, but from your point of view, what is the benefit?
I think you look at that match on Sunday, probably there was a couple instances, Scotstown's experience, keeping it out of the tackle, moving the ball, opening the pitch up, maybe not running into 1v1s when it was wet, and I think that's something that we've probably learned over the years, as well. You probably look at some games and people say, Kilcoo's maybe read their luck slightly, which is probably true, even like Clonduff this year, there was a kick of the ball, and I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you tonight. But I think the work that you put in on the lead up, that wee bit of luck sometimes swings your way, and I think if you do everything right on the lead up, you'll get that wee bit of luck. And as you say, like them tight games, that experience, and knowing the right men to get on the ball, and you have full trust in your teammates that they'll make the right decision whenever the pressure's on and the crowd's shouting, and it's a couple of points in it and there's a title on the line.
So that's a snippet from the Kilcoo and Scotstown camps. You can read all about the previews, the interviews in more detail in GaelicLife.com. Just out today, we have an offer for newcomers, £1 for the first month, and we cover all grades, all codes, all the way to your All-Star scheme on the 13th of March next year. And we have podcasts here every Monday, every Thursday. Subscribe via YouTube and Spotify, and you won't miss any of our podcasts. And we will be back on Monday, where we will find out if it's Kilcoo or if it's Scotstown that'll have the Seamus McFerrin Cup under the Christmas tree and preparing for St. Bridget's in that All-Ireland semi-final. So thanks very much for listening, and thanks very much to Michael Warnock for coming on to preview Saturday's final, and hopefully it will be a cracker. We'll wait and see.